Enclosed by a wall and dotted with 5,000 trees, Pere Lachaise Cemetery is a peaceful oasis in the busy city of Paris. With its narrow streets lined with stone structures, it's almost a city unto itself, a city of 1 million souls who reside here for eternity. This street, for example, is lined with memorials dedicated to foreigners who fought for France in its 2 world wars: Armenians, Poles, Italians, and Russians. Pere Lachaise Cemetery was opened in 1804 by Napoleon. It was part of Napoleon's grand plan to locate cemeteries outside of the city limits for hygienic reasons. The cemetery was named for a well-known priest who once lived here, Father, or Père, François Lachaise. His job had been listening to King Louis XIV's sins.
He must have been a good listener.
What began as just another humble cemetery would soon become home to some of the world's most famous and infamous people. The Columbarium. This complex of buildings consists of a crematorium.
That's where bodies are burned to ash.
And a columbarium,
where urns with the ashes are stored.
The main building is marked by a dome with a gilded flame. The chimneys on top are still used in cremation. To the right and left of it are rows of arcades. These have over 1,000 cubicles for housing the urns with cremated remains. Underground, beneath the courtyard, there are about 12,000 more niches. While the famous novelist and playwright Oscar Wilde was Irish, he's buried here because he spent his final years in Paris.
It's adorned with heavy-winged angels trying to fly.
Back in the 1890s, Wilde was the toast of London. His novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray, was a bestseller. His play, The Importance of Being Earnest, was playing on the West End. He'd even toured America, speaking to packed houses. He was known everywhere for his flamboyant clothes and outrageous wit.
Be yourself, Wilde once said. Everyone else is taken. He also said, I can resist everything except temptation.
In 1895, at the peak of his fame, a scandal broke. It was discovered that Wilde had been having a secret homosexual love affair with an English aristocrat. Wilde was arrested, tried, and sentenced to 2 years in prison on the charge of gross indecency. Wilde's wife abandoned him, even refusing to let him ever see their children again. After he'd served his time in prison, Wilde was exiled from England and settled in Paris. He was a poor and broken man, living in a shabby hotel on the left bank. There, he caught an ear infection, and his health declined rapidly.
Alas, he joked to a friend, I am dying beyond my means.
He died in the year 1900, age 46. Among his last words in the rundown hotel,
either this wallpaper goes, or I do.
Today, Wilde has become a kind of martyr to homosexuality. His grave is now a gathering place. As the inscription on the tomb says, Wilde is mourned by outcast men. Fans come from all over the world to kiss the tomb, leaving heavy lipstick marks. But these days, it's behind protective glass. Check out the backside of the tomb. There's a short resume of his life. Despite his ordeal, Wilde remained true to his Christian faith. An inscription on the tomb affirms that, quote, he died fortified by the sacraments of the church.
Maybe so, but I like another of his quotes. I don't want to go to heaven, he said. None of my friends are there.
By the way, when Wilde was buried in this cemetery in the early 1900s, Pere Lachaise was still just another cemetery. When it opened back in 1804, it was a common graveyard, too far from the city and not even sanctified by the church. No one wanted to be buried here. Then the cemetery owners came up with a brilliant marketing plan. They dug up famous Parisians from elsewhere and reburied them here.
It worked.
It sure did, and by the late 1800s, Paris's rich were just dying to be buried here, alongside other famous Parisians. Eventually, it would attract even international celebrities. Today, the cemetery has about 70,000 tombs, houses 1 million souls, and covers 100 acres.
Bigger than Disneyland.
On your left, keep an eye out for several monuments that remember French airline tragedies. Another remembers a flight that blew up over Niger in 1989, killing 54 French. Gertrude Stein. This groundbreaking American writer was born in the States in 1874. In her 20s, she traveled around Europe. She dropped out of med school and settled in Paris. It became her home for the rest of her life. In the 1920s and 30s, Paris was the world's literary center, and number 27 was the center of Paris. Every Saturday night, the city's brightest artistic lights flocked to Stein's apartment to eat, drink, and share ideas. Her most famous quote is, "A rose is a rose is a rose."
Which means what?
As you go, you'll pass by emaciated statues. These remember victims of the concentration camps and Nazi resistance heroes. Remember that during World War II, hundreds of thousands of French people were rounded up and sent east to Nazi concentration camps. Some 200,000 never returned. Many victims were Jewish. You may see tombstones of Jews with pebbles placed upon them. These represent prayers.
It seems like Pere Lachaise is more than just a cemetery with a few famous graves.
Yes, it's become a kind of Westminster Abbey of France, a place where the nation comes to remember its history. This is the so-called Communards Wall. It marks the place where the quixotic Paris Commune came to a violent end. At dawn on May 28, 1871, the last 147 communards were lined up against this very wall and shot. They were buried in a mass grave where they fell, right here, in a trench at the base of this wall. With them, the Paris Commune died. But the spirit lives on. Ever since, this wall has become a rallying point for workers and unions fighting for workers' rights. They gather here to march, wave flags, and shout the motto of the resistance, Vive la Commune! The grave of Edith Piaf.
Elle chantait de Paris d'après-guerre, elle chantait de Paris populaire.
In the 1940s and 50s, Edith Piaf was France's most popular singer. Piaf was literally born in the streets of Paris. She was raised in dire poverty, in her grandmother's bordello and in her father's traveling circus. She kept performing even when the Nazis occupied Paris. Piaf's offstage life was messy. It included a teenage pregnancy resulting in a daughter named Marcel.
So she died at age 2. Tragic.
Piaf had many romantic affairs, and they all seemed to end in tragedy. One boyfriend was a pimp. Another was murdered. Some even suspected Piaf was involved. She had a heartbreaking affair with her co-star at the Moulin Rouge, Yves Montand. Then, when she finally found true love with the middleweight boxing champion of the world, he suddenly died in a plane crash. Piaf struggled with alcohol, painkillers, and poor health. But those experiences only seemed to make her performances seem richer and more authentic. And every night she got on stage and sang the song that summed up her tragic but optimistic spirit. The chorus went,
Non, je ne regrette rien.
No, I do not regret anything.
Non, je ne regrette rien. Ni le mal, tout ça m'est bien égal.
As you know, France has been rocked in recent years by a series of horrific terrorist attacks. One of the worst occurred in Paris back in 2015, and one of those victims lies buried just ahead. Bernard Verlaque. Verlaque was a cartoonist for the French satirical magazine called Charlie Hebdo. As you can see from the grave's inscription, Verlaque had a nom de plume, Tignous. He and his magazine gained a reputation for biting satire about politics and social issues. Charlie Hebdo printed several controversial cartoons depicting the Islamic prophet Mohammed. In January 2015, the magazine's offices in Paris were attacked by Islamic terrorists. Verlaque was one of 12 people killed in the gunfire.